Hey guys, this is my very first YouTube video, and I want to do more of a discussion about this stuff and kind of give it a small, digestible video for you guys to understand my opinion on some of these cards and some of the articles they're putting out about Light Seekers at Playfusion. I know if you are part of my Twitch stream, which I hope you are, I love you guys all. You are amazing people to be chatting with while I play the game. I wanted to kind of put out more YouTube exclusive content about the stuff that I did talk or slash rant about on my Twitch stream, which if you guys were there, was like a 3-hour discussion that we had about several topics. And I want to kind of break them down and do small YouTube videos for people that don't get to catch my stream and don't want to sift through hours of me just ranting. To talk about my opinions and kind of get them out there. And if you guys want to discuss in the comments below on this video, please do give it a like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, all that fun jazz to help this channel and my Twitch channel grow for the amazing game that we all love to play. Now, as many of you are probably aware, that as the title of this will go, we are here to talk about Cage of Oppression. Yes, the most oppressive card that people have been talking about since Abyss Tentacles came out. Can't wait, right? They did put an article about that, and I'll put a link to the article down in the YouTube description below if you want to read it. But they went on, the people at Playfusion went on to talk about why they made Cage of Oppression the way they did. And they wanted to explain about all the stats that are going into it, about how they came to the conclusion, how it was one of the most diverse cards that they worked on in this new set, how many changes it went on and stuff like that, and how it's actually doing in this set to kind of give us an idea of how actually oppressive the Cage of Oppression really is. Now, they went off to describe, they started off with the 4 objectives they wanted to do, and I wanted to talk about these real quick. The first one, it should be good into stall decks. Exactly. This is a card, in my opinion, that was first and foremost meant to be a utility card. It was meant to be a card to counter a certain matchup. It was not meant to do anything else. It was meant to be like, hey, you know, if we're going into like a stall matchup, this is the card we slot into like the last 3 spots of the deck, like our utility cards, to help counter these bad matchups. If you wanted to aggro and stuff like that, you would probably put in a shield wall or more defensive stuff, more healing, to help counter the aggro decks, right? Like the utility slots are meant to counter a certain archetype, while your deck still functions properly. Another objective they wanted to put in is that it couldn't be good for stall, which is awesome, because if a stall deck can run its own counter, then it's not good. And that's what the healing came from before. That's why if you heal, the thing will rotate, which is a perfect counter to stall, because if you're going against stall, someone who does no damage to you, then you're not healing, which means you won't have to worry about this thing rotating out. And the objective number 4 is that it can't be easily countered. And that, I think, is a huge thing, because as they were describing this, cards in the past that they've tried to make utilities for, such as Draga Hoarder and Font of Misfortune, they had exactly what they wanted to on the card to counter certain matchups. It's the thing that in those matchups, nothing else really mattered except for those cards. So people would save their buff removal for that counter card, in which case made it almost null and void. Those cards were, in my opinion, amazingly well designed. They just needed to be pushed a little further into the tech matchup. If they had the text that Cage of Oppression has, if both those cards had cannot be removed or returned, then I think they would be amazing cards. I think Draga Hoarder would have definitely helped against stall for the discording against the jesters, and I honestly think Font of Misfortune would be run right now against decks that run a lot of Graveyard Recursion. I think they'd be a great stall or a great counter type to like the whole Dread archetype, which is awesome. If you have just one card that like specifically targets one niche that really helps a deck work, that's awesome. That's amazing. It's like the one counter card that like, oh god, okay, I'm going to put one of these in. I hope by the time I need it, I draw it, and my opponent, I play it at the perfect time. It only lasts for 4 turns. You have to use those 4 turns to your perfect advantage, which is why I thought Font of Misfortune was an amazingly designed card. It wasn't pushed to that level, because then those types of decks know, like, okay, this is the one counter card I got to watch out for. I'll just remove it right away, and then that card is gone, and now your counter to it is your counter to my deck is gone. My deck can just overrun you and do its thing. You had your one ace in the hole type of thing, and your opponent would just save a card to get rid of it. And I think that those cards need to have the design or the aspect of they can't be removed or returned by another hero, so that when they hit the board, they do their very niche thing. They do their very specific thing for a certain allotted amount of time to give you that window of opportunity, to give you that tempo swing, to get you back up in your bad matchup that you teched into for. Now, their second objective, I'm going to call it second because it's number 2 on there, but their last one is it can't be too niche, which I personally don't agree with at all. Because all 3 of those, 3 of the 4, were leading me to believe that this was a utility card. This was a card designed to do a specific thing against a specific matchup. It was designed to help people that still wanted to play their deck their way, could slot in 2 or 3 of these cards and beat a certain matchup that was being very potent in the meta, to help them be able to beat these matchups easier while still running almost any deck. And when they said it can't be too niche, that's going into more, in my opinion, of a constructed card. That's building it into it can't be too niche means this is a card that we want every deck to be able to utilize, even if it's not the stall matchup. Which, in my opinion, no, this card was meant to counter a stall matchup. Don't make it good against every other deck, because that's what your constructed cards should be doing. That's what the cards like Tyrax Mercenary. That's what, Spark Wisp, all these things to get you to the end game, that's what the constructed cards are for. These utility cards are meant to help beat other matchups that you're having a hard time against. They're not meant to help your deck run smoother and to get you to the end game. That's the point of those other 27 cards in your constructed, in your meta deck, in your archetype that you're running. That's what those cards are for. These utility cards are meant to simply help you beat the matchups that you're having a hard time with. And that's what kind of bugged me, is when they said it couldn't be too niche. I'm like, the whole point of a utility card is to be niche, is to help you in these certain matchups. And they said it's because they didn't want it to feel like a dead card. And I understand that. I really do. And they're like, hey, if you drew a card like back in the day with Draga Hoarder, if you drew Draga Hoarder and your opponent wasn't making you discard, it felt like a bad card. That's fair. That's completely fair. But the thing they also have to realize is there are cards out there that utilizes other random cards to its benefit. If you're running a deck that runs the Skyrider, discard a card for 4 damage. Guess what? That utility card that was a dead draw is now 4 damage. There's tech cards that literally remove your own buffs to deal 5 damage. Demolition Bot. Play that card out, remove it for 5 damage. There you go. You finally got a benefit from a card that otherwise was dead in your hand. Dread is now starting to discard cards for advantage. Draga Hoarder has an amazing ability of being a beast. Now that we're discarding beasts to get values with Gorehawk Chopper, or with Gore Chopper, I don't know, I think it's Gore Chopper, you have a beast card that was a utility card that is now able to just discard for value when you would run into a matchup where it otherwise was a dead card. And I think that they kind of lost that idea of that just because it's a dead draw doesn't mean there aren't other actions cards or even combo cards that could possibly interact with a dead card and make it valuable. They had the Kriebel Raiding Party back in Awakening was a 7 damage card if you just discarded an unaligned card. That was amazing. That means that your utility cards would be discarded and increased by value, even if it was 2 or 3 extra damage. A dead card got value in a deck where you spotted it in to face a matchup that you thought you were going to come against, and then you didn't. And that's why I think that these utility cards still need to be their niche. They need to fit their really fine parameters of only helping you in certain matchups. The other matchups, I'm okay with them feeling like dead draws because we have several other mechanics in the game, even right now. And in the future, if you don't open it up to having other mechanics, like Astral has Moonlight Burrower, which is, if it's not an Astral card, you get to look at the top 4 and take an extra action. Guess what? If you put that on a line card down and let it rotate out to do its own thing, or whatever you have to do to get it out of your hand into the discard pile, now Moonlight Burrower gets a benefit off of it. There's several cards in the game right now, and hopefully in the future, that can benefit off of a dead utility card because it wasn't used the right way you wanted it to, because there's other ways to use these action cards. So I do really strongly think that Objective 2 shouldn't have even been on the table for this card in the first place. Because what they did to it is they said it can't be too niche. It still needs to find value. Guess what? If Cage of Oppression is out there and gets you at least 3 to 4 damage over the course of the game, then it got value, in my opinion. If one card gets you around 3 to 4 damage, that's value. Playfusion said themselves each card should value about 2.5 points of damage or resources off of you per action, right? Because 1 to draw it, 1 to do it, and that should get you about 2.5 on average. If this card is out there and the only way to remove it is if you're healing, that card is going to sit there for probably 3 turns and get you 3 damage. All you have to do is just not heal for 1 or for more than 1. And that card, if it gets you 3 damage because your opponent can't remove it, your opponent can't even interact with it, that's going to be value no matter what the case is. So in my opinion, the number 2 objective, it can't be niche. That should not be on the table when making a card like this that is meant to counter a specific archetype. It is not meant to be a card to fit into other archetypes or even build an archetype around to make it better. And they went in to describe that's the reason they ended up with it. They did a whole bunch of testing with it. They didn't want it to be too slow damage, and there were a lot of community reception, which they also put in this post, which I highly recommend you read it if you haven't. It's been out for a while now. The community responded with, it should be unique. I don't agree with that. I don't think it should be unique, because if it's unique, it completely bypasses the fact that you cannot get the accumulative damage to beat these stall decks in time. Because if you draw them late in the game and you can only put one at a time down, they're still going to only take one damage. Stall decks can heal up a lot. They can do a lot of counters. They can do a lot of plays. And it's not really much their life total that they're worried about. It's their deck size. And if they're making you discard cards, they're doing all this stuff to lower your deck size down while you're only doing one damage a turn, they'll still outlast you. So the unique thing shouldn't have been on the table. I do think you need at least 2 or 3 of these things out on the board to kill a stall deck, is to what makes it really good. Now, if they increase the damage, then it would be way too good, right? You can't have 2 damage and have it unique, because then everyone would just run it and it would still do 2 damage a turn. It would be a better insect swarm. It would be a better Mantix hatchling. It would be a better everything if it did 2 damage, bypassing everything. So it does need to stay at 1. It can't have unique. The other thing they said is it should have fewer corners. Once again, I do not agree. And I've been said it before after they actually put this post up, is that if you had like 1 or 2 corners on it, then there are other cards that can counter a tech card. You shouldn't have to have a tech card to counter a tech card. And people are like, oh, you could just do this. And Fountain of Time, all these other things will make it just rotate out, completely making it null and void, which means that stall decks can then just run a Fountain of Time and counter it right away, because they'll just rotate it out and they won't need to waste a buff removal on it. So it does need to have 3 or more corners so that it can't just be completely wasted by another card. It's meant to counter an archetype, not meant to be countered by a card that can just be spliced into that archetype. Now, the fourth one, the third one, I believe. Yes, third one, is the one that I've actually been pushing for, is that it should rotate from 1 or more healing. And the reason this needs to happen is because, and from what we've been seeing also, is that there are decks that literally build around a utility card to make their deck run more smoothly. And once they start doing that, this card once again goes from the utility base slot where it was meant to live and meant to thrive into a constructed base slot of being a core part of the entire constructed deck, of the entire archetype, which is the heal for 1 archetype that we're seeing now. Because it's the drawback that you can avoid. And we saw that in Awakening. There were a lot of cards in Awakening that they got rid of and they actually fixed in the erratas, where the drawbacks were so easy to avoid that they weren't even drawbacks anymore. They were almost advantages that you could easily play around. Fumbling Alchemist was a great example of that. It was 6 damage, but you had to discard a combo card in your hand. All you had to do was just make sure you didn't have a combo card in your hand, and it was a 6 damage attack. It was always better than Tyrax Mercenary. And what Tech was really good about doing is drawing cards and then putting cards from their hand back into their deck. So it was a very easily avoidable condition that was supposed to be a drawback. Now, giving this thing 1 or more healing would keep it in the range where, hey, a stall deck does no damage to you, which means you shouldn't be healing at all, which means this card fits that archetype counter extremely well. But what it'll also do is, hey, in a normal archetype, in a normal deck, you can still put it down and have it do, like I said, 2, 3, maybe even 4 damage. And you'll have to heal eventually because you're playing a matchup. You're interacting with your opponent is what the game should be doing. And if you heal, then it'll rotate out. It doesn't have burn on it. You can bring them back if you really want to. But the simple fact that it has a drawback that is avoidable in an archetype makes this a core card for an archetype and no longer a utility card. That's why I'm still pushing for this card to have 1 or more healing, to make it so that these decks can't really abuse the downside of this card, or the drawback is, hey, if it rotates out if you heal for 2 or more. Okay, I'll just continuously heal for 1 or more over the turns. And the thing is that with a card such as Duskblade Tome, which is simply an item, probably the best item in the game, some people can, probably put in the top 3, is if you're below 20, heal for 1, draw a card. Otherwise, you just draw a card. That card in itself is an amazing value card because you are consistently drawing cards before the end of your turn. It means that the card draw can be used in the next action. It is used in so many decks right now that just run items or want to get card draw out of it that don't have a hero ability like Xyle or High Curator Arwen. But even in those decks, it's still running the Tome for the 1 point of healing and an ability trigger. Because there is literally an item that heals for 1 when you're below 20, that item alone can be splashed into any deck along with the unaligned Cage of Oppression. And those two cards interact so well together, it's literally put into an archetype. And that's what you need to start avoiding, is you need to start avoiding these utility cards to then be put into, or at least modified into, an archetype. These cards that you're making are becoming so strong and so easy to play around that they're fitting into core decks, into archetypes, and they're defining the meta. And if you have one deck that defines the meta that was meant to be a counter to one deck that defines the meta, you're going to have a rock, paper, scissors matchup, and it's going to be a very undiverse meta. You're going to have a stall meta, you're going to have an aggro deck, and you're going to have the one healing that counters the stall. The counter the stall will beat the stall. Stall will beat aggro. Aggro will beat the one healing because it'll overkill them. And it once again will just be those three decks. And we need to have a more diverse meta. We need to have more matchups between decks that are very diverse, but can have the utility cards come in to help counter their certain bad matchups if it's drawn. If it's not drawn, then it just happened you had a bad draw and you lost that matchup. It's all, there has to be a little bit of RNG coming into card games like this where drawing has to be a factor. And if you make a utility card that simply really refines an archetype, it's no longer a utility card. It's a card that counters an archetype in an archetype of its own. So that archetype is the counter to that one. And that makes a very stale meta to me. Now we go on down here to read how Cage of Oppression is performing. And they're saying a lot of statistics and they're explaining to us, hey, you know, the Cage of Oppression decks are actually winning below 50%. And they said that games on average right now, the length of an average ranked game is 12.5 turns per player. Now, if you break that down and you consider, okay, half the turns are them passing or drawing or using their actions to draw, the other half is how they're killing you, which means a player is killing you in 12 turns, or with essentially 12 cards, right? Because in 12 and a half turns, you're drawing 24 cards, or you're using 24 actions. If you spend half those actions drawing, the other half spending them, it's 12 cards. Not even like a third of your deck is what is winning the game, which means to me those decks are aggro. Those decks are the attack cards that are bypassing and blowing up the one heal decks because they can't heal fast enough to beat the aggro. So the aggro is beating the heal one is beating the stall, and the stall is beating the aggro. But there are so many people using Cage of Oppression right now that stall has almost become non-existent, which means now it's back to aggro versus the heal one, deal one. And it's going in that way. And yes, a lot of matchups are going to take 12 and a half turns because aggro kills you so quickly. I face several aggro players on the ladder that just use attack cards. And that is another video that I want to get into at another time, and I will talk about that later. But, and they go on to explain that the Cage of Oppression, their win rate goes up the longer the game goes on. Exactly. The longer the game goes on, the more damage Cage of Oppression does, the more time you have to heal back up in increments of 1, or sometimes 2 if you put in some of those cards, and that'll help you win because it's a card designed to win the long game. It's designed to win the games that are dragged out to like turn 30 or 40 because those are the decks that they're meant to beat, is the stall, the games that do drag out that long. That's what the card is designed to do. So they're telling us that the win rate goes up the longer the game goes on. That's a no-brainer to me. The card has infinite damage. As long as it doesn't rotate out, they can bring it back, and they're doing infinite damage. Making the game go on longer is a benefit to them. So they go on to explain, to clarify Objective 2, we want to say that every single deck should play it, but we need to be playable in enough decks that A, it's prevalent enough that stall decks don't automatically rise to the top, and B, it's not punishing your deck that if stall backs do rise again, you can't put a couple in. That's the thing, that if they're not, and that goes back to the whole thing, they really refined Objective 2, which is the one that I don't agree with at all. They really refined Objective 2, and the one that I don't agree with all is Objective 2. Because, no, not every deck should run these. I think that's a total cop-out. The decks that should run these are the ones that are the players that are running into stall. They're the people like, oh, hey, I just faced 3 or 4 stall matchups in a row. Time to slot these in to help beat what's right now good on the meta. You suddenly don't fight stall anymore, and you're like, okay, well, now I can take these out. I'm fighting a lot of aggro, which means, hey, maybe I need bigger healing or more damage to just beat them before they beat me. That's the slot of utility. That's the slot that utility needs to fit in, is that you take them out and you change up your deck versus certain matchups. There shouldn't be one deck that does not need a single card change to beat everything. Because once that happens, that simply tunnel visions and puts blinders on the meta to the fact that, hey, this deck beats everything. Why not just play this deck? And then it's this deck versus this deck, and it's A versus A, and there's no A, B, C, or D or anything. It's one deck versus the same deck, which is what we had back in Sicario, which is what we had back in the Dolo stall, all this stuff, where the meta was so defined that people are like, hey, what are the top 3 decks? Those are the only ones I want to play because those are the only ones that win. There's no creativity in the deck building anymore. There's no more, hey, I want to try this hero out. What can I do? And then they try it, and then they lose to High Curator Arwen, or they lose to Dolo stall, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not going into ranked, I'll go back into casual. And then the player base goes down. And that's where all this is coming from, is that the utility cards are not niche enough to make it so that you can beat certain archetypes with the deck that you want to play, which will then diversify the meta. And I'm going to go here and go up back and stuff. And they said that they wanted to make it better than previous cards like Draga Hoarder and like Font of Misfortune. Font of Misfortune and Draga Hoarder did amazing things for what they were designed to do. Like I said, the only thing that really stopped them was the simple fact that the archetype that you would go up against them in hopes that this card would give you the win is that your opponent would just save a removal for it and kill your ace in the hole, and it would be dead. What those cards needed, and I pushed for this before too, those cards needed what Cage of Oppression got, which was they cannot be removed or returned by another player. If Draga Hoarder is out on the board, it does nothing. It is a beast buff that sits there and looks at your opponent going, don't make me discard. Otherwise, I am literally not a threat to you. But it's out there, and it cannot be removed or returned, which means, hey, if I play this in the right matchup, this is going to be my ace in the hole. If not, I better find a way to use this in another matchup or in another way to still get me value out of what they are referring to as a dead card. Font of Misfortune. It stayed out there for 4 turns. It had 4 corners on it, but every single card in every single graveyard had burn. That literally doesn't affect a whole lot of matchups except for the final few. And those ones is when you play the Font of Misfortune late in the game and you say, hey, now all our graveyards have burn. Dread, if you're hoping to get stuff back, I'm sorry it doesn't work for you. And all Dread has to do is, okay, Shadow Puppet, I saved it for that card because none of your other buffs mattered to me because I was playing the long game. I was playing the heal, the Necro, or the Abyss Weavers that they had back then. They were playing Soul Trader, they were playing Devour. They healed and waited until the end game. Even their combos right now have a lot of healing and defensive properties. And then afterwards, there's like, okay, Necro Juddling. Okay, here's Spirit Gate. All this stuff to bring their stuff back. And that's when you needed to have Font of Misfortune out on the board for at least 4 turns to make it so your opponent, when they were about to get the recursion, couldn't do it for 4 turns. They couldn't remove that buff. They couldn't return it. They had to last 4 turns before they could really start getting their deck back in place, or in the same pace that they wanted it to. And that's where these utility, these ace in the hole cards come from, is you put 1 or 2 in your deck that face that certain matchup, and it's a dead card if drawn. If you're facing an aggro, who cares? They're not bringing any cards back, and it feels like a dead card, yes. But then, like I said, there are other cards out there that help you use dead cards in a way that's not what the card text says, whether it's discarding for a bonus effect or doing something else for it, or just putting on your discard pile, or even tech, just put it back into your deck and draw other cards. Make that dead card a card that you can utilize to, put in the bottom of your deck with Tempest and draw again, because Tempest is one of the best heroes right now for tech anyway. We all know it. We're not disagreeing that at all. Selene could just discard to the bottom to draw 2 cards. Selene is an amazing hero as well. There's a lot of ways to use these dead cards that the game can then utilize in the future to be like, hey, discard a card of either this family or like an unaligned card or something like that, to really help utilize these dead draws in a different way to still get the deck to run its value. And it doesn't feel bad if you have to discard like, oh man, I really don't want to discard this Chim Chim Militant. I just do Draga Hoarder. I can discard Draga Hoarder because it's really a dead card in this matchup, and I can keep my deck flowing the way I want it to. So that's why I'm still, even after this article, still pushing for them to change it to any healing will rotate it. Because if any healing rotates, that means that yes, every deck can still run it. Even an aggro deck can run it, because aggro decks don't heal all that much. But it's only meant to counter a stall archetype. If not, you can put it out there and you can still get 3 damage to it before you have to heal and rotate it out. And if not, you only have like 2 or 3 heals in the deck, that card's just going to sit out there. And the reason I feel like people are feeling so upset by it is it's once again a card that they literally can't interact with. They can't return it, they can't remove it, they just have to hope your opponent heals. Their only way to do that is to pressure damage on your opponent to force them to heal and get that thing to rotate out. Otherwise, it's just a countdown timer on them with the infinite value that you're getting from it every turn that it's on the board. And if there's cards in the game that are effectively leading you faster and faster to a win condition that your opponent cannot interact with, that is only going to make people upset. That is only going to make people furious at the game. That In my opinion, and I'll make this in another video right now, the game is becoming less and less interactive between players. And that's really sad to say in a card game, is that a card game is not interactive. And the reason is because people are just laying Cage of Oppression out and then doing micro heals and letting a card that your opponent literally cannot touch. All they have to do is look at it and watch it kill them as they micro heal in an archetype that is built around a utility card. That hurts to say. That hurts to say that a utility card became a core piece to an archetype. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys got some understanding. Like I said, if you agree, you disagree, please leave a comment in the YouTube video below. I hope that someone at Playfusion sees this, understands where I'm coming from, at least when I say that a utility card should never be under consideration of the objective where it can't be too niche. Utility cards are meant to be niche. They're meant to be cards that only help you in specific situations. And if not, then you swap them out for other utility cards that will help you in those situations. And if you run into a bad one, then you find other ways in your deck to utilize those cards to still get value out of your quote-unquote dead card. So thank you guys very much for listening to the video. My objective is still this card needs to be, if you're healed for anything, rotated out. Because then it still beats stall, because stall does no damage to you, but at the same time, your opponent can interact with you in a way where they'll deal damage, and any healing rotates this thing out to the point where it's not as much, or it doesn't feel as bad to go against. And that, in my opinion, is what the game really needs right now, is people to feel good about playing any deck they want to, as opposed to people feeling bad because they keep running into the same deck over and over again, losing to a card they can't do anything about. Thank you very much for watching the video, guys. I hope you liked it. There are definitely more YouTube exclusive videos to come from me. Next video, I don't know. I have a list of stuff I want to do, and I don't want to say it at the end of this video because obviously then it would just, I have to follow a certain order, and I don't know which ones I want to make yet. I might have to make a new one between then. So I hope you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel below. I still got to do like a whole ending, opening thing to these videos if I'm going to keep doing more, which hopefully I am. So yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please like the video below. Please leave comments on whether you disagree or agree with me. What's your opinion on the card as well? All I ask you don't like no crude language, no like, wow, this video sucked. Don't do that. I want constructive criticism. I want feedback that we can have a conversation with. If it's just a one sentence, it's like, hey, great video. Awesome. Video that says, hey, this sucks. I mean, I'm probably not going to respond to it either. But I'm open to discussion with you guys. Just start a discussion. Start a constructive criticism discussion with me about what your opinion is based on mine, whether you agree or disagree, and then we can talk about it either on my Twitch channel, on my YouTube comment section, or on my Discord server. Any of that, I'd love to be open and honest with you guys about how I feel about certain cards, how I feel about certain things in the game, and that's what these videos give me a chance to do, is a small digestible version of it, so you guys can listen to my opinion and either agree with it or disagree with it. So thank you guys very much for listening to my YouTube channel, or listening to my YouTube video. I hope it was informative. I hope you guys got a second opinion or a second thought about why I think this card still needs a change, even though Playfusion put out an article of why it doesn't, and my reasoning as to why it still does. So thank you guys. Watch out for those Cage of Oppressions out there. Have fun seeking that light, and I'll see you guys next time.